Tipper, representing Colorado House District 28, and Denise Maes, Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Colorado. Denise. All right. All right, let's get started.
Excuse me, Vanessa. I'm not able
yes?
to turn. I'm not able to turn on my video. So could you?
Julian, allow Denise to turn her video on.
I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
There we go. Everybody, Denise Maes, our Public Policy Director. Thank you, everybody. I want to get started with a question for you, Jeremy. You talked a little bit about the genesis of how this documentary film came together. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you were so compelled to tell this story?
Yeah, absolutely. I had initially been asked to come to an encampment that was being set up outside of the facility by a group called Abolish ICE. Keisha, one of the characters in the film, I was filming with her to help her raise money for legal fees to help free her husband. And I was just like so moved by some of the stories that I was hearing and by the encampment itself that I decided to start living there. So I just started filming, and over the course of living there, we saw people come out, get released, people start sharing their stories. And, one of the things that really spoke to me was, people talking about having to work in the facility for $1 a day, right? And like as a Black person, right, just watching this, our bodies, Black and brown bodies being used for profit. It really spoke to me and spoke to my history. And so I felt that this was something I needed to do.
You said that it speaks to you and your history. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, as a Black person in America, you're just constantly aware that your existence in this country is due to your body being profitable for extremely wealthy, powerful people, right? Slavery was here for hundreds of years. And I sort of see the same logic being done in our immigration system, where, there's no reason why many of these people, if you believed that they had committed a crime and that they needed to be prosecuted, would just, not have an ankle bracelet, right? I have lots of problems with ankle bracelets, but that's one thing that you can do. But they keep them in these detention centers, which are prisons, for long periods of time, for very little reason other than the fact that it is profitable to do so. And so these laws are written in such a way that it allows corporations like GEO and CoreCivic to make billions of dollars every single year off of primarily Black and brown bodies. And so to me, that really echoes a lot of our history and a lot of our past, and how, Black people in this country were treated for hundreds of years.
Thank you, Jeremy. Representative Tipper, you are sponsoring a bill to provide universal representation for those that are in immigration proceedings. Can you tell us a little bit more about that bill and why it's so important?
Sure. The bill that we're running would create a grant program with some matching state dollars, what we call general fund dollars. And the point of the grant program is to give individuals with that meet certain income guidelines the opportunity to have a lawyer represent them in immigration proceedings. So for folks that are familiar with like eviction, legal eviction defense fund, it's a similar idea. And the basic premise is individuals that have a lawyer in immigration proceedings are 10 times more likely to be successful in their cases. And so the obvious connection there is with almost every single injustice in our country is that wealth is a determinant of your sort of ability to succeed as a human being. And what we don't want is for individuals not to be able to vindicate their legal rights in this country because they can't afford a lawyer. And I think one of the most frustrating pieces as a lawyer myself is that immigration proceedings are the only proceeding in which an individual can be detained. And as Jeremy said, they're prisons. And I completely agree with Jeremy. I mean, I was thinking, watching, the screening, profiting off of the involuntary labor of an individual is the original sin of this country. And here we are perpetuating the same thing, not just in our immigration system, frankly, but in our detention system, period. So the bill gives individuals the opportunity to have a fair shake at a process that's incredibly rigged. When you think of individuals that don't speak the language, that aren't familiar with the culture, much less the legal proceedings, the odds are so heavily stacked against them. They don't stand a chance if they don't have a lawyer. And even with a lawyer, it's hard. As we saw one of the individuals spotlighted in the film, some of the lawyers were saying you have a 2% shot. Well, that means she has no shot without a lawyer. So it's an important bill. It's going to be controversial. It's going to be party lines, which is really disappointing. But I'm glad I'm here tonight to watch this screening and just to be reminded deep in my core of why we're running this bill.
And Representative Tipper, I know that folks will be asking, but what can they do to support this legislation?
Appreciate that. One thing I always say is contact your legislator. We would love to have folks testify. I'm sure I'll volunteer you, Denise. I'm sure Denise can help coordinate that. We're working with CERC. COPA has been an advocate as well on this. So many of the organizations spotlighted actually in the facility are a part of sort of our tribe, let me say. So we could really use support on social media, anything to kind of communicate the, I think, humanitarian message. And a mentor of mine said, change moves at the speed of relationships. And I think one of the things that's really important about this production, Jeremy, is you show those relationships between families, between members in the encampment, between individuals that maybe are connected because their dad and their husband are stuck in the facility. And so that also holds true for testifying in committee, is sort of telling your story, is building a relationship with someone that doesn't know you, but decides your fate. So just, so there's some ways, and you can always reach out to me directly in my office and we'll figure out a way to get you plugged in and connected.
Thank you. And you talked about storytelling. Jeremy, can you tell us why you chose the storytelling device to really kind of explore the issues in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was one thing to sort of hear about the things that were happening at the Geo Detention Center, and it was another thing to meet the people who were coming out. There was a number of stories that were in this documentary, but there were countless other people who I met who, for very good reason, were too afraid to talk. There were countless people who had just been released on bond and were afraid of retaliation, but had experienced terrible things. And that affects you in a much different way when you can associate it with another human being, right? And I always like to say that film is an empathy machine, and that when you can really see and hear and meet people, that influences us differently We are not logic machines, right? We are empathetic, emotional creatures, and we need to be able to connect with one another. And so this is maybe a small window into the process of what actual relationship building does for human beings, right? So
you talked about the connections with other human beings. And Denise, I know that you toured the facility in 2019. Can you tell us a little bit about what you observed and what you learned from the women you met with?
Yes, and thank you, Vanessa. And I just wanted to thank the other panelists and just Jeremy for making this film. I really think it's really amazing, and I think in so many ways it really does reflect a lot of the feelings and thoughts that I had when I visited the facility. And I think one of the things that is a recurring theme, not only in the film, but also with the individuals speaking, is we call it detention, but it is no different than a prison. The minute I walked in, you know, the security you go through, you hear the doors clang behind you. You're in this very, very sterile environment. Everybody in there looks desperate. They look scared. They look anxious. And I shouldn't say that they look that way. They, in fact, are all of those things. They are in a system that they have no answers to. And to Representative Tipper's comments and her legislation in particular, is there are individuals there that have no idea why they're there. They don't know how long they will be there. And they have very, very little lifeline outside. And so in talking to a lot of the individuals there, they universally or uniformly complained of terrible food, awful medical treatment. One woman had to rely on others in her pod to help her take a tooth out because she was suffering so dramatically from a toothache. And that's mild compared, of course, to what we saw happen to Mr. Sanimi and what has happened to so many others there. So there's a great deal of fear and desperation. And I think we all need to realize that, come to terms with it, and want to do something about it.
Denise, as a follow-up, you talked about the medical conditions inside of GEO. Who is responsible for the conditions inside the GEO facility?
GEO largely, and this is one of the issues that Hans Meyer brings up in the film, is we have a private system, a private prison essentially, where the government has relegated and given away its obligation to GEO to run its operation, which is why, as Jeremy mentioned, individuals are paid $1 a day to work in the kitchen, to do laundry, to get out of their pod. And they're willing to do it for $1 a day because they get out of their pod. And the reason why GEO lets them do it for $1 a day is because that means GEO doesn't have to hire outside janitorial services or anything like that, where it's clearly going to have to pay more than $1 a day for that sort of work. So it helps their profit margin. And you know, within ICE, within the Homeland Security, there is supposed to be someone who does go and inspect these facilities. And in fact, there was a federal inspection of this facility that gave it many, many thumbs down on many levels: food, medical, a whole bunch of things. But it still continues to operate, and it still continues to operate at a high profit.
Jeremy, did you want to add more to the profit margin or the profit motive, excuse me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, any system in which keeping somebody inside of that facility is going to yield you money every single day, right? It is in your interest to make sure as many people are in there as possible. You know, we know that contracts with ICE have mandatory minimums. We know that, you know, there does seem to be an interesting phenomenon where, you know, during the COVID crisis, as COVID numbers would go up, you would also see a dramatic increase of people being moved to other facilities. It is sort of like a scary phenomenon that, they know that there are reporting requirements for people who have COVID and so forth. And then we'll see 100 people in a week get moved to Louisiana. It's this massive governmental network. And while the profit motive is absolutely in effect, I think a lot of people think, okay, well, we'll just close down this one facility. But this is a multinational corporation, right? This corporation spans the entire country, and regulations that we do pass here in Colorado do not apply in places like Texas or in places like Louisiana. So while I do think it's important to meet this with local legislation, at the end of the day, this corporation is national, and we need federal solutions to be able to solve this problem.
There is a question from the audience, and I'm going to open it up to whoever feels comfortable answering it. But it comes from Gwen Young. Any legislative or executive order efforts to abolish ICE private detention centers in Colorado, similar to the DOC elimination of private prisons?
Denise is probably good to answer on this as well, but there was a bill, I think it was last session, it's hard to remember now with COVID, that it turned into a bill that essentially studied what the impact of closing private prisons would be in Colorado. And what was sort of tragic about the debate on that bill is that, as you all know, with the exception of really the Aurora detention facility, most detention facilities, and I'm not just talking immigration, but prisons are in rural parts of the state. And so they're located in, one, conservative areas, two, what can be kind of blighted areas or areas that don't have a lot of industry for jobs. So the conversation or the debate was about, this private prison is the only source of income for members of, this town or this county. And I remember sitting there thinking, back to Jeremy's opening point, listen to the conversation that we're having as we're saying, we're trying to justify, again, profiting off the incarceration of individuals. We are profiting off of their servitude. And but the answer to your question is yes, there continue to be conversations. I don't know of any efforts this year. And Denise, I don't remember if the results, I think the results of that study did come out. I can't remember, so you might know. There continues to be within my caucus an effort to push in that direction. And the good news, I will say, is that the head of Department of Corrections in Colorado is actually is supportive in, I would say, in getting rid of profit in the prison system in Colorado. So we are continuing to look at that and see what we can do.
I'll just add to that by saying, I do think the executive order that President Biden signed, of course, was important to the extent that it did do what it could to eliminate further contracting with private prisons. And I think it's an oversight to have not also gone, frankly, the extra inch of also saying we're going to wean our way off of this addiction that we have to the private immigration detention process as well. And that debate or that game or that push or advocacy certainly is not at all complete. I think we need to hold our congressional delegation, our senators, and continue to ask that question: what are they going to do about taking away the profit motive of detention facilities? And then we can have a broader conversation. Well, we should have it simultaneously. Let's just detain fewer people, and then we won't need these many facilities at all.
So a question from the audience: how can members of the general public help?
I think one of the things that Representative Tipper mentioned earlier with regard to just her bill, the Legal Defense Fund, I think that's really just true generally. There will be other bills that are coming in the state legislature that are immigration related issues. And it would be great to get all of those folks who are listening, tuning in, watching this particular webinar to get involved. And also, excuse me, not only at the state level, but also, as I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, about keeping our congressional delegation and our senators knowing that we really do demand something really big and bold from our federal government.
Thank you, Denise. Rep Tipper, there are a few folks in the audience that are asking for the name and number of your bills so that they can follow and support it.
I appreciate that. Let me, if you go on to the next question. So the bill is the Immigration Legal Defense Fund. If you go onto the Colorado legislative website, you can search actually by that title. Remarkably, the Colorado website is actually pretty good, but I will also get the bill number and put it in the chat. And I'll also put my contact information. So for folks that are interested in participating, we would love to have you. The bill is actually going to committee next week it's on the 30th of the month. So we have a little bit of time. And for individuals that have never participated in the legislative process, a committee hearing is kind of the threshold hearing that the bill has. And so it's a smaller number of legislators made up of the proportion of Democrats and Republicans that are in the House. I see Denise is on it. She got the bill number in there. Thanks, Denise. And so it's like the gatekeeper. We have to get the bill out of committee. And so we have to get a majority of the 11 members on committee to vote in favor of the bill. And then it goes to the floor for debate. So, but the committee is really the place where people tell their personal stories and why it's important to have lawyers in these proceedings. And I think particularly, a lot of the stories that Jeremy spotlighted show the effect that it has to family members, to the community, to the trust that people place in law enforcement, to the belief that people have and the dreams that they can pursue. And those are really powerful stories at convincing some of our members that maybe don't understand these issues because they don't know anyone that's been through this process. So I will put my contact information in the chat, but would love to have anyone that's interested in participate, especially first timers. I think that's a really important way to engage in your democracy.
And I don't know, Vanessa, I put the House bill number. I don't know if it goes out to everybody watching, but it is House Bill 1194, Immigration Legal Defense Fund bill.
We'll make sure that Julian makes it visible to everybody.
He has a lot of power, that Julian, is what I hear.
No, we have to be careful. So there's another question from the audience. Francie Leffert of the Immigrant Freedom Fund of Colorado. I'm worried that when GEO is closed, more people will be sent to prisons in states where there are fewer activists. What can be done about that?
I think I'll just chime in and really want to hear what other folks say. I often resist calls for closure of the facility for that reason. I think it really is up to the community to make that decision. I think it's a different question of whether or not it be privatized. So I think we can all uniformly say that it should not be a privately run facility because it needs to be more open and transparent. And as I said earlier, I want to have a conversation about detaining fewer people and then we won't need these facilities at all. But indeed, that is the issue of closing the facility in total, is where do the individuals that are there, where do they go? And do they go to places where they have, they have very little lifeline now. They may have even less if they are sent elsewhere.
Thank you, Denise. Jeremy, we have a few folks in the Q&A asking where they can view the documentary and when will it be more widely available. And some folks are suggesting PBS.
Yeah, you know, in an ideal world, I could just put this online and then everybody could view it all the time. Unfortunately, I don't think that my personal platform is going to get it that far. So I thought the best way to make it be seen by as many people as possible was to do the festival circuit and to have it be seen and perhaps picked up by a distributor. So, you know, PBS is looking at it. I'll know in the next few months if that's something they would like to do. But yeah, I'm hosting more screenings coming up. I'm sending it to some festivals. So hopefully in the very near future, it'll be available for wider distribution. That's my hope at least. And, you know, if not, maybe I will just put it online. We'll see. But yeah, the idea is just that it can have as big an effect as possible. So
I've, watched this documentary at least 20 times, Jeremy, and I always see something new. The artistry that you put into this film is incredible. So we're all gonna hope for the widest distribution possible. I have a question for you. When you made this film, there was still sort of this impending uncertainty on how the election would affect the folks inside. Now that we're sort of on the other side, how do you view the documentary? How has it changed for you?
yeah, well, it's a little bit of a time capsule. I will always remember the masks now. But in the context of the election, you know, this was mostly filmed over the summer and into the fall. And the hope was if Biden got into office, he had said on his website, and he had said that he would be ending private immigrant detention centers, as well as a total moratorium on deportations and so forth. But, you know, as of today, private detention centers are still open. There have been over 26,000 deportations. The executive orders that we were hoping for didn't come. And it looks like now legislatively, whatever is going to be done is going to be pushed back significantly. So, you know, I was talking to folks from United We Dream about it, and they were promised a lot of things under Obama. They fought like hell under Trump, and they were promised things by Biden, and they are no longer willing to wait. And so I sort of see this, and when I watch it now, I'm like, man, what is taking so long? So I think that it's really up to us to put on the pressure and keep the pressure up both locally and nationally to show that this is a priority. This is a national priority, that people are still being deported. People are still being held in these places. The pandemic is still happening and raging through these facilities, and there's still very little accountability. And so the pressure still needs to be kept up.
To that idea of accountability, Denise, what are the different levels where change can be made, federal policy or local policy, in order to change the system?
I think quite a bit, honestly, and you know, there are a few bills that are coming forward, as I mentioned earlier, that are coming to the state legislature. Obviously, Representative Tipper's piece of legislation. There's also some legislation that will help individuals who are victims of a crime try to ease the process for them to get a certification that will help them to get a U visa. There's a bill that will limit our state government from sharing our personal information, personally identifying information with ICE agents. There's a bill that's moving through that is going to get rid of the term illegal alien in state statute. There is legislation that will put fewer people in jail and therefore fewer people on whom sheriffs can tattle to ICE individuals and subject them to deportation. So there is definitely movement at the state level, but I don't think any of us kid ourselves that state legislative efforts will ever solve the problem, because immigration is a federal issue, and our federal government has really been a disappointment when it comes to the area of doing true immigration reform, not biting around the edges, not the little band-aids here and there. We do demand a bolder way. You know, we got the former occupant of the White House certainly did not hide his disdain for our immigrant brothers and sisters in our community. So maybe that makes us a little bit better today than we were 3 months ago, but we still got a long way to go, and we're not stopping.
One more question, and then I'd like to have a moment for everybody to share sort of their final thoughts. There's a question in the audience from Nora. Why are inspections so lax regarding the conditions inside, regarding medical care, food quality, crowding, etc.? Who is in charge? The big one.
Well, it really is ICE. It really is Homeland Security. I mean, that really is where the buck stops. But I think when you have a privately operated facility, it is subject to far less transparency and accountability. It's easier to hide things under the rug, so to speak. And it simply makes them, it makes them less accountable. And that's why the continuing mantra of ridding of the private operation is really, really essential. Last session, Representative Benavides did sponsor legislation that ultimately did get signed into law that does have our Colorado Department of Health do a surprise inspection. And we looked at that inspection results, and it does highlight some issues. So then the next question is, well, how do you address them when it's a privately held facility on private land? And that's where the real hard stuff it's harder to figure out and really harder to do.
Jeremy, one final question for you. Are you and or other protesters still camped out in front of GEO? Or do you have social media or someplace where we can follow your efforts?
The encampment ended at the end of the summer. Many of the people who were involved in the encampment were teachers. And so when they needed to begin working again, and when weather got a little bit colder, the encampment no longer became logistically possible. But there are still groups like Abolish ICE Denver and Sanctuary for All and Doctors for Camp Closure who are doing this work and have been consistent in being bold and out in the field and doing this. And as well, like groups like ACLU of Colorado, COPA, CERC. There are a number of ways to get involved and to help out. I think we saw some pretty incredible protest movements these last few years. And my hope is that they will continue on for the next few years as well.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think it'd be great if you could put the website or social media in the chat so that folks who are interested can follow the film as it grows. So let's go to final thoughts. Rep Tipper, would you like to get us started?
Sure, I'll just start with thanking everyone, for the opportunity to be here, Jeremy, to see your work. It's sort of tragically beautiful, the stories that you were able to compile. And again, I think for me, one of the most important things as a legislator is trying to change hearts and minds within the building, which then affects the lives of others outside of the building. And so my hope is that people will realize that there are 100 legislators, but there are 6 million Coloradans. You guys have more power than you know. And, coming to committee and testifying, and now you can do it, online through Zoom or through WebEx, writing your legislators, being a persistent, present voice in these discussions is incredibly meaningful. And as a legislator, we are humans too. And there are times when it just feels like your back is up against the ropes and there's no way that you're going to get the bill out of committee. And so we also kind of need that support to know that we're not in this vacuum operating by ourselves, but what we're doing is the right thing, the moral thing, the humanitarian thing. And so selfishly, I sort of need that to fuel me too, is to know kind of a reminder. And like I said, Jeremy, thank you so much, because, watching the screening or this film is just such a good reminder and sort of re-energizes me and sort of fills my heart and continuing to do this work. So stay involved, don't give up. As Denise said, there are little things that we're able to do. They are sort of nipping at the edges, but if it makes it better for one person, it's worth it.
Jeremy.
Yeah, I would just like to take this time as I sort of think back on the creation of this film and all of the people who I met and spoke to. Legal fees were the biggest thing on people's minds, right? How on earth are you going to come up with thousands and thousands of dollars to keep paying lawyers? I talked to people who had $15,000 of debt just from paying a lawyer for 9 months, right? And so I really hope, Representative Tipper, I really hope that this bill is successful. I encourage everyone to get involved in helping it to pass. But I do want to bring up the story of Hilda Martinez. She was the woman in the film who spoke about her husband who was forcibly deported. Her husband was part of the Mexican army and was basically threatened by the cartels and said, either you help us or we'll kill you and your family. He brought his family here and applied for asylum. His asylum was denied. And he was eventually forcibly deported, where he is now directly still in harm's way. Hilda Martinez, his wife, and she and her children were in the film. She went down to El Paso to visit family recently, and she was detained by ICE and held in a facility in New Mexico. Through an outpouring of community advocacy, she was able to be released on bond, but now she has to pay legal fees as well as find a way to take care of her children. And that's a level of pain that I've never experienced. And it really affects me. So I'm going to put her GoFundMe into the chat. If folks could, if they have extra income, make a donation, that would really mean, I'm sure it would mean a lot to her, but it would also mean a lot to me personally. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeremy. Denise.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jeremy. There are so many individuals in that documentary of yours that are simply exemplary of so many others that require our attention and require our help. I do want to echo, I think, what Representative Tipper said, that, yeah, there may be some things that we're doing that aren't going to revamp the system completely, but what we are doing is going to help a good group number of people. And that is the sort of hope that I want to inspire among all of us. Really, to what I said in the film, if we can look at our immigrant neighbors, our families, our friends, and we can see in their heart and in their eyes that all they want is hope for a better community, hope for a better life, not only for themselves, but for their children and for their other loved ones, a hope to thrive in this community, a hope to live an American dream. That's what brought them here. And of course, what brought them here is fear and running away from their homeland, which is very, very telling that they would go through such scary things in order to come here and then therefore be detained. Seems so the antithesis of what we offer here in the United States of America. So I say this a lot, and people have heard me say that, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But in this work, what we're wanting to do is go far. And that's why we're asking all of you to go with us together and bring hope to our immigrant families, friends, and neighbors. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Denise. I'm always going where you're going. And as the daughter of an immigrant, I so believe in that American dream, and it's everybody's job to make that dream real. So thank you, Jeremy, Representative Kerry Tipper, and Denise Maes, and everybody in the audience for joining and asking questions. Also, thank you, Purple Colorado and Community Language Co-op. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.